One of the most incredible things about our story is that when the girls were diagnosed, really everything we hoped and prayed for was that Belle would stabilize and Abby would have no symptoms and that you wouldn't be able to tell that she has Niemann-Pick type C. And the most incredible thing about our story is that all of those dreams are coming true. And our older daughter has stabilized and she is happy and she's going to school every day and has friends and participates in all activities at her school. And that's incredible. And we're beyond grateful for that. And we know that none of that would be happening without the medicine that she's on. And our younger daughter, Abby, continues to have no symptoms. And that was our dream, that she would grow up and have no visible signs or symptoms of the disease. And that is what's happened. So it's incredible.
When we were diagnosed, the first thing we heard from the doctor's mouth is, you have a fatal disease and there is no treatment at all. Because of the work that Firefly has done and the NPC community together, no one's ever going to say that again.
Pam and Chris and the Firefly Fund are, of course, exemplary. This is community, yes, but it's also what we call citizen science. When citizens identify a problem, a question, a need, and catalyze solutions in concert with professional scientists, clinicians, and engineers. So what Pam and Chris and the Firefly Fund are accomplishing will be in the textbooks of the future.
We had heard about how long it takes to develop a drug. It takes 10 or 15 years from beginning to end. And we didn't have that when we got here. Belle was already tripping and falling and having staring spells and choking on everything she was eating. And so we felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff when she was diagnosed.
Niemann-Pick type C1 is an inherited disease. It is a disease that fits in a larger category called lysosomal storage diseases. In this case, in Niemann-Pick C1, there's an inability to get cholesterol out of the lysosome. So the storage material is cholesterol. And when that cholesterol accumulates inside the cells, it causes damage to the cells and leads to cell death, particularly in neurons in the brain.
So when we got here, what we quickly learned was that there was over 100 years of foundational basic science that had already been published. And so it was as if a baton were handed to us when we got here. A marathon of sorts was already underway. And we immersed ourselves into the NPC community and worked really quickly to move 4 compounds forward, accelerating the creation of a drug cocktail.
It buys time, and that time is precious.
And what we've started with is a compound that is a substrate reducer, a compound that is a cholesterol modulator, a heat shock protein therapy, which actually helps the protein do what it's supposed to do, and a mitochondria drug. There is consensus among NPC experts that a drug cocktail focused on treating multiple pathways is the only way to fully render NPC a chronic disease, thus giving the children the best chance at a full and long life.
So the time that we met the Andrews family and were introduced to the Firefly Fund, Liam, his health was somewhat stabilized following a battle with liver disease. And so at the time that we met the Andrews family and the Firefly Fund, we were looking into what treatment options we had to support his Niemann-Pick diagnosis as well. At that time, he was on an off-label drug, and we were looking into what else was available. And we were getting some conflicting information. We were getting told no. So in talks with the Firefly Fund in conjunction with Hope for Marion, they helped to provide us with some guidance. And ultimately, it's your decision, but we find that when children receive treatment options earlier, the outcomes tend to be better. And so we did express interest in getting on an experimental medication. And I would say within 24 hours, the Firefly Fund had connected us with a doctor and had gotten us started on the process for an expanded access use for that medication. So it was really instrumental.
When Marion was first diagnosed, she was only 1.5 years old, and that was the month that Firefly Fund and the Andrews family were featured in People magazine. So it was really a huge inspiration for us. We connected with Pam right away, and she spoke with me on the phone probably every night for like 2 hours a night. for the first several weeks, helping to guide us and gave us a lot of hope that kind of like the page was turning in the disease and that we were coming in at a time that the outcome would be much more hopeful and that Marion would be able to grow up.
Firefly Fund, for me, the original introduction was the transition from when I was an active clinician at Dell Children's to working with the Andrews family. And so I was touched by working with the MPC community, both Belle and Abby, but a group of families are impacted by MPC. Really, they started out early in the trenches and understanding, the community of itself, but identifying the needs there. And then they found their niche of how to begin their involvement. Subsequently, I think that if you look at where Firefly Fund is right now, it's really turned a corner in which they have multifaceted projects that really, some of them they lead, others that they foster connections to enable them. And so I see them as a really strong collaborator in the ecosystem.
It was almost like in the disease, there were silos of people doing really good, really important work. But I think what the Andrews family and through the work of Firefly Fund has done is kind of pulled everything together to work collaboratively and cohesively together. And that's really made a huge impact for Marion.
Getting him on this experimental medication as early as we did, I think, was pivotal in the success that he's having now, his stabilization with the disease, and all of the great things that he's doing now.
Thanks, Firefly Fund.
Firefly hasn't just focused on research or medicine. It's not the only thing that we focus on. Really what we're trying to do is move a disease into a system. So everything from research, but also access to the drugs and access to the providers and access to the scientists. Access all the way around. Medicine, of course, is important, but also so is screening, knowing early, knowing that you have the disorder so that you don't have to go through a diagnostic odyssey and go see a dozen specialists in order to get answers, especially now that we have the technology to get those answers sooner. Whole genomic sequencing will allow families to get answers to the concerns they have about their children and some of the developmental delays they may be having sooner, which will open the gates for them to receive treatment sooner. So it's a very important piece of getting information about the health status of your child. Treating before the visible signs or symptoms with these neurodegenerative diseases like Niemann-Pick type C has the most impact. So with Abby, our younger daughter, we started her on treatment when she was just 20 months old, and the differences really in the trajectory of her life and Belle's life are quite astounding. What the medical and scientific community is learning from pediatric forms of dementia is that the earlier you treat and the earlier you diagnose, the better the health outcomes. DPRIT stands for the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, and it was modeled after CPRIT, which is the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute, which has been tremendously successful here in Texas.
Many people think that dementia is restricted to elderly people, but in fact there are hundreds of forms of dementia that occur in childhood and young adults right across the lifespan. Most of these patients have inherited metabolic diseases which result from mutations in both copies of a single gene. This is in contrast to the later onset dementias, which, as you've heard, often have multiple causes. Because these are single gene diseases, we have a much greater understanding of the mechanisms of disease, many of which can be translated to the more common later onset diseases.
One of the exciting things about DPRIT is that a percentage of the funds will be available for pediatric dementia research and innovation, and that will help disorders that are lysosomal storage diseases like Niemann-Pick type C, Batten disease, and Sanfilippo, and other lysosomal storage diseases.
This could be the gateway to learning how to treat the larger diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
Because we understand these disorders comparatively well, they offer us the opportunity to have insights into the more common later onset diseases.
Everything we dreamt of when we got into the trial has come to fruition, but we've gotten to this point that maybe it's time for a new dream.
We're really looking forward to the future, and with support from organizations like DPRIT now, it really does make us enthusiastic that we will be able to scale what we've learned and translate what we've learned for other pediatric lysosomal storage diseases. And we will continue our mission of working and advocating for early diagnosis before visible signs or symptoms of the disease so that children can get diagnosed early and we can intervene early. That's really what we would like to see, are a bunch of kids that can get treated before symptoms of their disease. We hope you'll join us in shining a light on Niemann-Pick type C and other pediatric rare neurodegenerative diseases that affect children and have no cure.
Join the flight.
Join the flight.